talk about yourself and your own, like, the fact that you feel like constantly, I am not doing enough, I started to wonder, like, do you think that's related to that issue of secondhand trauma that you were discussing? What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that in some ways it is. I also think it's just kind of and in this way, I'm saying yes. It is sort of an effect of like seeing suffering and realizing that there is no way for you by yourself to be able to fix it. Like there is nothing, you can do things to like make people more comfortable, but there is no way that you can like alleviate the circumstances that have created the situation that this person is in. There's nothing that you can like immediately reach out and do. And
I cannot go back in time and solve decades of U.S. intervention that created the situation in your country, which is why you're fleeing, right? Like, and even if things
like even fixing
immediately
things
resolve
on
themselves,
this end,
doesn't mean things are going to get better. That's really hard.
Yeah, like even being able to like change the US immigration system, which is something that I feel like we live in a democracy, we're very empowered to like change our government and like vote things in that are important to us. And like you kind of realize in the middle of this that like you can call your elected official a million times, and these are systems that are so deeply entrenched that there's very little you can do to actually make anything better or change things. And I think that is, you then like, it reflects back onto you, or you end up kind of questioning yourself and your motives and your presence in these places, because you're like, I'm doing this one thing, I'm doing this smaller thing, but like, how am I feeding into these larger systems? How am I taking just enough pressure on the pressure cooker doesn't explode? How am I actually helping people instead of just sort of making them comfortable in the middle of this really awful situation that I'm somehow complicit in because of like my government is, and how I'm involved in sort of like voting it in or giving it some kind of a mandate to be doing these things essentially in my name. And I think that then it's very easy for it to become a question of like individual and personal responsibility for things that both are and aren't individual and personal responsibilities.
Right. Yeah. I mean, on a personal level, my husband's family is from Korea, and whenever we talk about immigration, he has he's one of those people who for years would say, well, people need to do this legally. And then when you read and do more research, you realize that we've made sure that no one can do it legally anymore. Right?
Yeah, no, you have to be very, very wealthy or very, very well connected or very, very patient to be able to do things like the right way. And it's also important to note that coming in and asking for asylum is a correct way to do it. And it's a way that still takes years. It's a way that still is incredibly complicated and difficult, but like it is a legal pathway to citizenship. And it's one that we've made very complicated and very difficult to access, but it is a correct way. And I feel like people talk about it as if it's this like backdoor or it's a cheat or it's like technically legal, but not really. And like, no, it's legal. It is
right. Yeah.
An avenue that we have created.
And it's something that we say, I think, I think about the UN Charter on Human Rights, and I think this is something that we say all the time, right? Because we belong to that charter, but we make sure that it's pretty much impossible to do. Okay, so from listening that we're really interested in personal stories. So the questions I have here are a lot about your own experience with religion, God, etc. From reading the book, I was really interested because I didn't see any critiques of religion. and I don't know that there's a question on here, but I was really interested because you seem to have, as a teenager, experienced this, like, yeah, I'm not really into God. I don't think God can exist in this kind of world. And then you have that kind of line about applying to Harvard Divinity School is like, okay, God, this is your last chance. Right?
Yeah.
So prove it to me. So I don't know where you are actually on in a relationship with God, or what your conception of divinity is. We have had people on the show who are atheist and who talk about, you know, what atheism, why atheism, et cetera, et cetera. So there's totally room for that wherever you happen to be on the spectrum. Please feel free to be honest. But I am interested in, you have sort of the reference, like these very positive experiences as a child with your family in church. And so I'm just kind of wondering what your experience with religion and divinity was as a child. What did your family teach you, and what did you keep, and what did you feel like, I don't know if I need that anymore?
Yeah, so I was raised as a kid in the Vineyard churches. I don't know if that's a movement that you're familiar with, but it is sort of charismatic evangelical. They believe in like the gifts of the Spirit and prophecy and speaking in tongues and all of these things, which is like a very intense thing to be exposed to as a small child when you sort of walk into church and there's someone who is proclaiming in tongues, or who is I remember people like crying or laughing a lot and like fainting and things like that, and it was like, oh my God, what is going on? Especially as a little kid who like didn't really understand like how to contextualize that, or like there was always this fear that it was going to like happen to you and you wouldn't have any control over it, and it would just happen and you would be suddenly crying out of nowhere or something like that. And so that was the kind of church that I was raised in up until I was about 11. And then we moved to Texas and we started going to just like a Bible church there. I don't think they were like affiliated with any of the big denominations, but they were kind of Southern Baptist-y in their vibe. And we were one of the few families of color there. I think that at that time I was also really developing my politics, which as a teenager were very oppositional to like everything I was growing up around. So I was, and still am, like a huge lefty, and was kind of like figuring out what that meant and what that looked like for me. And a lot of the places where it showed up was sort of acceptance of other people, being really committed to seeing other people have opportunities and have access to justice. And I don't know that I had like language or sort of understanding around the ways that politics and religion interacted, other than sort of understanding my church as like a generally conservative place and feeling a little bit out of place. But I think as an adult, the sort of like friction that I could sense there was that a lot of we talked about in church, and a lot of the ways that ended up coming out was that it was a pretty misogynistic place. Like I remember our youth pastor being like, tell your sons that you're proud of them and your daughters that they're beautiful. And it was like, really? Are you not also proud of your daughters? And do you not also have beautiful sons? Like, come on, we can do better here. And there's no reason to split those things out. And it was a lot about sort of, there was very little about trying to make society better in that church. And it was a lot about sort of self-improvement through withdrawal from society. And I was like, no, we're in it. Like we're part of this culture in this place. And like, I don't think it does me any good to be like homophobic or pushing against the rights that gay people would like to have for themselves, including marriage. when I am myself a sinner in so many other ways, and like when I am not someone who is doing everything she can to make her world, her neighborhood, her community better, like this is the last thing I care about in this society. I want to, make sure that people have enough to eat, and I want to make sure that like families are able to stay together and all of these different things. And I was just kind of like, why are we talking about this so much when there's all this other stuff going on? And as soon as I went to college, I stopped going to church. But my senior year, I started doing, it was my junior year, I wrote an article on closed Catholic churches in New York City. And I met this group of women who went to this church in East Harlem called Our Lady Queen of Angels. And their church had been closed by the Archdiocese of the city in 2008. I met them probably in 2011, and they were meeting outside of their church every week, every Sunday since that church had closed, and having their own kind of mass, their own kind of community, and sharing reflections. And like, it was a little bit of a protest still, but it was mostly about them finding whatever religion was or whatever had been important to them about their old church with each other.
Right.
And I ended up writing a thesis about them and sort of like charting that transformation from protest group into like church community. And I think that sort of experience was really what planted the seeds for divinity school later. I had kind of realized that my job was not what I wanted it to be, that I needed to figure out something else. And I was like, I should go to grad school because that's what you do, I guess.
Yes.
And I thought a lot. I wrote a thesis about my experiences with these women, but I also wrote like a creative writing essay that was much more lyrical and brought in my own experiences and kind of my own frustrations with the church and my own anger at something that I think these women had also experienced, which is this idea that like you feel very strongly about God and you feel very strongly about the Bible, but when you look at the church as the institution, you feel abandoned by it in a lot of ways. And so I think that divinity school and choosing to go there was both a last chance for God, but also kind of like, I know school, I'm good at school. If I can approach it in this way, maybe it will be the thing that finally sticks, or it will be the thing that finally helps me understand what it is about this that has led me both to walk away from it, but still feel like it's really important and really central and really a part of who I am in a lot of ways. And I think that basically what divinity school did was kind of reaffirm that like, I am still not totally sure that churches in general are the right place for me, or I haven't found the church that I'm like, yes, this is the place where home. I feel my whole self like acknowledged. This is home. But there is something about God, about Christianity specifically, that is like deep encoded into me and is deeply important. And that's kind of what the assumption that I've been working from for myself for these past couple of years. So like, I don't even know that I would like describe myself as a believer, because like going to churches also feels like such an important part of that and such an important way to like find community through that. But things like theology, Christian morality are still really, really important to me in a lot of different ways. And like so many thinkers from the church are people who I like keep on my bookshelf, who have informed the way that I move through the world. And that feels important to acknowledge also.
Yeah. Well, I think obviously there's a morality in the book that says, I mean, that line from 107, which I said kind of holds the book together for me, which is, in the years to come, it will matter the way we treated the people who came to us looking for safety. It will matter who was wronged and how. And when I stop right there, I think, yeah, because Jesus told us, right?
Yeah.
We're supposed to be helping these people. He doesn't say to us, stone the adulterer. He says to us, feed the poor, make sure the widows are taken care of, etc. But it's interesting because the next part is, I believe in a future where we make reparations for these harms, which sort of ties, I would say, some kind of policy making together. So, untangle that for me. What are the influences on that sentence?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's definitely this idea of a real Christian morality there. And, I feel like a lot of our policymakers keep insisting that the United States is a Christian nation, but that only applies to very, very specific policy points and not welcoming the stranger, caring for the poor, all these other things, and instead applies to prohibitions instead of reaching out and helping other people. And so it felt particularly important to say, this is part of that. And I think the reparations line, while I was writing this book, I was working at an immigration nonprofit, and I was tracking pretty closely the government's response to the separated families. And by the time that I think that I got to writing part 3, we were in the middle of years of court cases where the government was sort of being very weird about whether or not they would give money to these families who had been separated from their children. And there would kind of be an announcement that was made that each of these families is getting $50,000, which is nothing right. For being separated from your child for months, years, having your child possibly lost in the system, and then there would be the uproar of we are giving the illegals $50,000 each, and the government would walk that back. And I think recently it's come out that these families are all getting asylum, or the chance to apply for asylum, possibly actually just asylum. I'm unclear on the details, but yes, that is the least you can do after traumatizing and harming these families, is to give them the chance for the legal thing that they applied for in the first place, or that they came here for. But it felt really important to me to say, we have done these things. These things have happened. It is not too late for us to make things right. And that making things right still feels like it falls into these questions of helping the poor, of reaching out to the least of these, of we can repent and we can acknowledge that what we have done was sinful or harmful as a country. But we are still an incredibly powerful country, and they are individual families who have fled here out of a sense of poverty and out of a sense of unsafety. And we can say, I'm sorry, all we want, but that doesn't actually fix anything. And it feels, in this case particularly, that repentance is not enough, that reparations are needed, that we need to at least give people what they came here for and what they suffered so much to even try to get a chance to achieve.
Yeah, I think actually you bring up an interesting point. What does repentance mean, really? And it would seem that repentance means righting the wrong. It's not just a case of saying, oh, I'm sorry, my bad, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But going forward and trying to heal what you can heal, what is available to you. That seems
and that's something that historically we have been very bad at. I mean, it was, I believe, only recently that we have formally apologized for Japanese internment. I believe that it is still a statute in our books that we could do it again if we wanted to. The Supreme Court has not or struck it down, declared it unconstitutional in that particular instance, or like, this only applies to this one rule. If we need to do it again, we can. And that feels like the opposite of repentance, of like, we're technically sort of sorry, but like, we reserve the right to do this again. And that feels, yeah, like the opposite of repentance. It feels like a press release being like, we sincerely apologize for something you may have misunderstood as being hostile.
Right. I'm so sorry that you feel bad, right? Like,
yeah, exactly.
how that goes. Yeah, well, and I think what's interesting about religion generally, and Christianity also, is that it's not asking us to support nation states, right? It's not asking us to set up borders, even though that's how people have begun to interpret it in this country, with Christian white nationalism, et cetera, et cetera. And so this idea of going to the border and of helping people, even in the small way that you keep pointing out how small it is, even in this small way, which seems really big at the same time. It does seem like there are these religious groups that are there and are trying to help. And in some ways it seems like religion is a really good place to do that helping, right? It's organized, it has a network, it has a variety of people. So I kind of want to talk about both what you saw as positives and negatives of religious groups coming to the border in Tijuana in order to help folks who are applying for asylum.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to clarify that like a huge part of the immigration rights movement is faith-based. Here in Chicago, we have a group called like the Interfaith Coalition for Detained Immigrants, and was founded by nuns, and they go into detention centers and they spend time with people who are there. The organization that I was a part of in in New York, the New Sanctuary Coalition, was founded as part of like the sanctuary church movement that started in the 80s, and kind of continued there. No More Deaths in Arizona is also church-based. I forget exactly what church they're affiliated with, but it was begun also by a pastor who was doing these water walks out into the desert to leave containers of water for people who were trying to cross
and those,
in Arizona.
I feel like those people are also in court challenging the border wall and stuff like that based on a Christian ethos, right? Saying,
yeah,
that this is against my...
Yeah, they were actually, some of their volunteers were charged with like littering in public lands because they were dropping off plastic water containers in these national parks and national monuments that are kind of all along the border, because it's a very unique ecosystem there. And some of their defense in court was, you know, this is a case of freedom of religion. It is in my religion to give aid to people. This was part of it. If you stop me from doing this in the future, it will be impinging on my freedom of religion. And so while I was in Tijuana, I saw a lot of people there who were religious and who were faith leaders. The group that I was with was from New York, and so there were a lot of like people who had come down from New York specifically for this, from different like sort of loosely affiliated churches, who were there to pray with people, who were there to just sort of, many of them, even when they came from traditions that didn't usually do this, were wearing collars. And so they were like very visible. People knew to seek them out if they wanted prayer, if they wanted sort of blessing, benediction over their journeys, if they wanted someone to talk to in that kind of framework. And a lot of people there did want that. It is it feels like a moment that requires chaplaincy, and it feels like a moment that requires some kind of a spiritual anchor, in the same way that like being in the emergency room or waiting for a loved one to come out of surgery like needs a chaplain. And so I think that their role there was a really deeply spiritual one and really, really important. And I think that was really good in most cases. There were also a couple of religious people who came down there who like didn't really speak Spanish and didn't really try to, and were just kind of like wandering around seeing the sights and not really like
sort of like
seeing
trauma tourism
people.
Is that what you're saying?
And that felt particularly bad coming from them, I think, and felt particularly harmful, to sort of watch them take in the sights, and like you kind of knew that like a sermon would be inspired by this later on or something, but it was really rough kind of seeing that and feeling like there was no even attempt to like make a connection or anything, that these people were so different from their parishioners that they like didn't even know where to begin, and that felt bad.
Yeah. Well, there's also this, so I think for my listeners, I should set out this idea of like, so the book is in 3 parts. Mm-hmm. First, you're in Tijuana helping people who are applying for asylum, and then they're going to start this terrifying journey through the U.S. immigration system. Mm-hmm. The second part is that you're in a church basement helping people who are already in the country, have probably been through that sort of
the border portion. Yeah.
The border portion. And now you're helping them translate their stories into English so that they can apply through the courts. And then you actually are sitting in the third section on deportation hearings for people who've been in the U.S. for some of them decades. And then you also get to witness or serve as a witness of those warehousing prisons where migrants are being held. And so that's sort of the structure of the book. But it also allows the reader to sort of see all the different ways in which these humans are being treated by the system itself, right?
Yeah.
So we might not know about, if we pick up your book, we might not know about the warehousing issues that are ongoing, but here you are describing it for us. So all of this description, I mean, who were you thinking is your audience for this? Are you thinking people who are informed on this topic and just need a rallying cry? Or are you thinking people who maybe don't know anything about this? What were you sort of writing to?
I think it was a little bit of both. I think even if you're pretty well informed, or this is a topic that you keep track of on the news really closely, there is still a sense of like texture and humanity that's kind of missing from a lot of the ways that things are reported on. There is a sort of like, what does it feel like? What does it look like that I felt like the book would be able to provide for someone, or for someone who, say, had just done application translations and had not been to the border, had not been to a detention center, didn't know what those parts were like. I feel like when you get involved with the immigration system, you're often getting involved in these really specific little points along the way. And so being able to look at it and see the whole thing in the way that I have kind of been able to. And there are still things and places that I like have not seen that are part of the system, but it felt like I had been able to have a slightly more bird's eye view of it, as well as being on the ground in all these specific, really highly charged places. And so that felt really, that was kind of part of the audience. I was like, I think even if you've been an attorney, even if you've been you know, an aid worker at the border, there are still parts of this that are going to be new to you or unfamiliar, and that feels important. I think that my main audience, though, was for people who, like me at the beginning of the book, are maybe bilingual, are maybe like sort of interested in this issue, but not involved, don't know a ton about it beyond what's on the news, but are suddenly feeling some kind of a call to action, some kind of a call to getting involved. And there's a huge difference between being interested in an issue and being involved in one. And part of the reason of the book is to sort of chart that journey and to be like, this is how I went from being someone who thought about this sometimes and like cared but wasn't actually involved, to someone where like it was my full-time job. It's something that I think about all the time. It's something that I am actively involved in constantly now. Like my life has extremely been changed by my involvement in these different organizations and these different groups. And that was kind of who I wrote for, was people who were sort of on the fence, who maybe knew some things but didn't feel like they could like get their arms around the whole thing or understand like how they could be a part of it.
And part of that is the discussion of how the system dehumanizes everyone involved, but mostly these people who are showing up asking for aid in some way. I want to go back to that. You have a discussion of prayer, and sort of you're translating prayers at the border, and I kind of want to hear that story, or have you tell that story for our listeners. So you get asked to translate a prayer, and it's for a certain girl who actually reminds you of you. So why don't you talk to us about that?
Yeah, so it was, you know, the priest sort of waved me over, and I walk over, and it's this family, 2 parents and a teen girl who looks to be somewhere in the like 13 to 15 range. And like, she's got her like chip black manicure. She's got a choker on. Like, she has been on the road for weeks, but she is still like, has a very specific sense of style that just reads like teen girl going through it in like some very specific teen girl kind of ways. And I was like, oh, I've been there. I know this girl. I have been this girl. And so, you know, we circle up, we all hold hands. The priest starts praying. I start translating. And I am not a habitual prayer. It happens sometimes, but a lot of times when I was doing these prayer translations, it would just kind of be a translation. It wouldn't necessarily be a prayer. And this time, just like that girl, being reminded of myself, being reminded of like where I was in my own faith journey at that time. Like, if that had been me, I would have been like rolling my eyes and being like, oh my God, Mom, why are we doing this? And like wanting just like this deep desire to want her to have the opportunity to like think these things through for herself, or to have the space to, you know, like write weird poetry in her journal and like be somewhere safe where she could like fully and appropriately be like just a teenager. And like somewhere in the middle of all of that desire, I realized that as I was translating, I was also praying, like fully putting myself in these words that were not really my words, but were still words to God and words to this family also, and just kind of putting all my intention and like my desire for these folks to be okay kind of into that. And so I think I mentioned in the book that like I don't know which is the prayer that counted, the one that the priest did, the one that I did, the one that sort of like floats up into heaven somewhere between me, or between our little group and like God. But there was like real prayer there that day, and real just desire for protection and blessing and safety coming from like all directions over that family. So I hope that wherever they are, they're doing okay.
Well, and I want to contrast that with the second story you tell about prayer at the border, which is a priest, I think, praying, "We forgive the government for what they do." And you were like, "I do not forgive," right? Which I completely understand. But I kind of want to say, like, I think that was a powerful prayer too, right? Like, hey, God, like, this is where my heart is right now because of all the horror I'm seeing. And that prayer is just as important in my mind than the one that says we want to play nice. And, we're just hoping everybody can get along here. I mean, that's one way to pray, but I think your prayer is just as valid to say, nope.
Yeah, absolutely not. I hadn't really thought of that as a prayer, but I think you're right.
Yeah. I think one of the great things about this time in Christianity is this recognition, and I keep hearing it from all kinds of people, that God is big enough to hear how angry we are, that God is big enough to handle all the messiness and all the pain, and especially when it's directed at him or her or however you think of God. And that to me has been really important. And so when I read that, I thought that's a powerful prayer that you're giving, and God can handle it. And I don't know what's going to happen, right? I mean, I do wish in my own life that God would come down and say, "I'm going to solve it all.
Yeah.
Don't you worry."
My bad. I'll take care of this. Don't worry. Yeah.
Right. But unfortunately I haven't had that ever. So
yeah.
So earlier this year, we interviewed Father Daniel Grudy at Notre Dame about his book, A Theology of Migration. And he has lots of horrible stories about Lampedusa and all these different places that he's visited. And he also talks about attending a Eucharist that's happening simultaneously on both sides of the border. And then he does all this work about talking about the Eucharist as a way to heal from that trauma. And I just wondered, I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but I just wonder if that idea resonates with you at all.
Yeah, I am unfortunately not familiar with his work, but I did go out and get his book as soon as I saw it in your list of questions. I was like, "Ooh, this is going to be a good one for me." But yeah, I think I was also at a service that provided the Eucharist on both sides of the border wall. And it felt in one way that it was sort of calling attention to the brokenness of the place where we were taking it. It was like, here is God's body, and God's body exists in this place that is like a 20-foot steel wall that divides people from each other and that divides families from each other. And that is a monument to so many of the things that are broken about this country and about the way that we are living in the world right now. And at the same time, God's body is there. And that is not necessarily something that feels healing on its own, but it is a reminder that we are not abandoned. And anytime we take the Eucharist, it is in a world that is profoundly broken and profoundly in need of God's presence. Whether you're doing it on the best day of your life, sitting in Sunday in your usual church surrounded by your loving family, or whether you're doing it, you know, after a really long, hard week of providing direct services to people who need so much more than the direct services you can provide. In both cases, it is calling God down into places that are in need of him. And yeah, it's something that I think I struggle with a lot, but it felt at once like it highlighted how broken and how far from God that place felt. And at the same time, it was comforting that God could be there.
Right. So it's as if to say this is exactly where God acts.
Yeah.
It's in these broken places.
Yeah. And at the same time, it was like, okay, God, act. Like, fix this. We are here. Right. We're calling on you. We are doing our best to make this better. And we are small and human. And like, we need more. We need help.
Right. So you have this image throughout the book, which is of your family engaged in what you call sobremesa, and my Spanish is incomplete enough that I don't know if that's like a term that people use, or if that's a family term for you guys, this sobremesa. So tell us about the sobremesa, because I feel like by the end you enact a sort of benediction on all these other families that are headed for the border, that like one day, hopefully, if we act as we should, these other families will have the opportunity to have their own sobremesa, but here in the U.S. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, so sobremesa is very much like a Latin culture thing. It is, I think, like fairly universal in the Spanish-speaking world, to whatever extent anything is universal in the Spanish-speaking world. But it's this thing of, after you finish a meal, you just stay. You stay around the table. You know, keep sort of munching on whatever's still there, but like you're not really, nobody's getting up to do the dishes. Nobody's like worried about anything. You're just spending time in community with the people you shared this meal with, but like you're not rushing anywhere. You're also not like worried about putting your elbow on the table because you're not like eating anymore, and it's not like this formal space. It's this really like relaxed sort of in between space. You're getting another beer. You're like, it's just spending time together in this really loose, informal way that feels like where the actual community and fellowship of the meal happens. Like when you say you're breaking bread with someone, yeah, you break the bread and you eat it, but then you do sobremesa, and like that's where the good stuff happens. And so that feels like both, that's one of those things that feels like the place where I am closest to my family, and feels like it is where my family exists sort of in its most natural state, is sitting around the kitchen table after we finished eating. And at the same time, I know that it's this like very universal thing that like everyone has. And so for me, it's like this cultural practice that is both very individual and very universal. And yeah, I think that there is this, I think a benediction is the right word for it, of saying, you know, there is space for this here. There's space for the kind of plenty and the kind of richness and sweetness that comes from having a good meal with your family, and then just sitting around the table, shooting the breeze with everyone, and being able to spend that kind of time without any worry and without any concern over anything. That was something that I was like, this is something that I grew up with, that is very important to me. That is the way that I am close to my family, and I want it for everyone. I want that kind of safety for everyone. I want that kind of comfort and relaxation and an ability to be together for anyone who wants it, and in like the ideal society that I feel like I'm building in the book, or that I'm describing, like that's what it looks like. It looks like being full around a table with everyone you love and having time to just spend with them.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. It was such a lovely image, and I felt so glad for you that you had that experience. I think in America we have enough families that don't have that experience, and then for you to hope and wish and pray for that for other people, it was an act of generosity, I thought. So thank
Yeah,
you.
I feel like whenever I'm talking about this immigration stuff, I end up sort of gesturing at being like, yes, I want this for immigrants, and I'm fighting for immigration in a lot of real ways, but like I also want this for everyone. Like everyone should be able to have that kind of plenty. Everyone should be able to have that kind of space and calm, and like I talk about immigration, but I'm really like gesturing at bigger changes than that.